This is the Ops Game Changers podcast, where we share real-life stories from remarkable leaders that are transforming the world of service operations in financial services, healthcare, and BPOs. In this series, we explore some of the key challenges faced by service operations as they strive to deliver more capacity, more productivity, and more business impact. In each episode, we delve into how these Ops Game Changers have addressed a key challenge or issue. Our guests share how they went about unlocking significant value, adopting best practices, and experiencing some game-changing results.
Hello and welcome to Ops Game Changers, the podcast that shines a light on the crucial role that operations teams have in driving business performance and improving staff and customer experience. My name is Bhavesh Vagela. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at ActiveOps, and I'm delighted to be your host. Now, in each episode, I hone in on a KPI or a challenge that a business has solved. We delve into how they went about doing this, and we explore the outcomes achieved. Now, today, I'm joined by Ben McManus, who's the Associate Director of Performance and Planning over at Fidelity International, to really learn about how Fidelity embarked on a strategy to become more data-centric. Now, Ben's going to tell us about how they went about building a central data environment and the impact this is now having on operational decision-making. But before we jump into the topic, let's welcome Ben to the podcast. So Ben, welcome to Ops Game Changers.
Hi, Bhavesh. Thank you for having me.
So before we jump into the topic, Ben, it's probably worthwhile just giving yourself giving our listeners a little bit of an introduction to yourself, and more importantly, how you actually ended up in ops.
Sure. Yeah. So I had spent 13 years. I joined the Air Force when I was 19. Spent 13 years in the Air Force, and once having children, I quickly decided that I probably should reset my life. So I looked at leaving the Air Force, and I had a really good opportunity at Legal & General.
Right.
And I joined a training team and ran the training team at Legal & General, and started to really kind of make some improvements in there, and got an opportunity to go and work in the change function.
Okay.
So moved into their change function, and which was in the insurance division, and then after some time had the opportunity to come and work at Fidelity, and that's where I've landed now.
That's fantastic. I mean, I guess there's probably a different podcast in the synergies between the Air Force and operations. I'm sure there's probably loads of synergies in the sort of things that you were doing back then, but that's for another topic for another day. So I guess for Fidelity, like most organizations, they're trying to become more data centric. But before we delve into that element of it, for our listeners who perhaps don't know enough about or don't know about Fidelity International, perhaps just tell us a little bit more about Fidelity International and what you guys do.
Yeah, sure. So we're a privately owned firm, and we give investment and retirement advice to individual investors and their advisors, and also institutional clients as well. We've got about 2.8 million customers, and I think we look after something like 586 billion pounds worth of their assets. So it's my job to make sure that we take care of that.
And from an ops perspective, what's your team and your role in delivering that and the end customer experience?
So the operational teams have kind of really gone through a big transformation at the moment. There used to be kind of two separate divisions. We've recently merged into something called GPS, Global Platform Solutions, where we brought the workplace investing side in with the personal investing side, and we're all looking for synergies and working together. And now my role is in a central team in the CAO function, and we look after the entire group. So that's about 2,500 people.
Wow, fantastic. So listen, this is such a timely topic. I've had the privilege of talking to lots of ops leaders like yourself all over the world, and the idea of the topic of data and becoming more data centric is such an important pillar from an operations perspective, especially when you start thinking about what's coming in terms of AI. And you can't really do a lot of this stuff without having a data environment, data infrastructure. And we've just done some research in the market, and some of the numbers are quite scary. I mean, the headline numbers are 95% of ops leaders, are really not using data in real time, which is quite crazy when you think about an operational environment. And I certainly think I think one of the stats in the UK is something like 90% of ops leaders, struggle to get recognize it takes a lot of effort to get any insights out of their data. So it feels like operational organizations are probably a little bit further behind in using data more effectively. So when you think about the journey that you've been on in Fidelity, if I kind of wind the clock back, what does kind of being data-centric mean for you and operations?
So I guess for me, it's that we use it in every single facet that we can.
Mm-hmm.
When I joined Fidelity, one of the things that I noticed straight away is that they were very customer centric. What that actually led to is that they were focused on the kind of the retrospective things that have already happened.
Right.
And we all used to joke that, the data that came out was a lot like driving the car facing backwards. Some of the data was 45 days old, and it was really hard for senior leaders to make priority calls. The operational guys on the ground were spending a lot of time trying to, manipulate the data to make sure that it was a true and accurate reflection of what happened. And to me, that was kind of one of the biggest problems that we wanted to solve straight away. And that was where that's where we embarked on our journey.
And was it at that point were you thinking, okay, I've got to make sure this data is available for my ops leaders and the customer facing folks to make better decisions? Or was it was a bit of a mess? You just needed to get a central view of understanding what you had. Perhaps, kind of paint us a picture of what it was like.
Yeah, sure. So when I joined, I started having lots of different conversations with all the leaders. So I was just acclimatizing to the company. And one of the things that I guess shone through was that in the individual pockets and individual teams, they had a really good understanding of their backlogs, the work that was coming in, how they were getting through that, and they had their own measures. But then when you start to look at that aggregated across the company, they were using different standards, they were using different tools,
Right.
and when that then came up to the senior leaders, they were having to do a lot of analysis themselves, and that's why we were creating a lot of presentation packs and things like that to really try and put all this together and to tell one story. They weren't talking a common language, so that was the big problem that I was trying to solve for, I guess.
And was it, I always have this, a view and impression of, spoken to many customers and many ops leaders, and it's everything from lots of spreadsheets to post-it notes and different ways of just tallying stuff up. Is that, does that sound familiar in terms of things that you guys?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And it was everyone is doing their absolute best to try and get the outcome that everyone wants, but it was just inefficient essentially. It was not a good use of everyone's time to have to track it separately, to interpret the data so that the senior leaders can make their decisions off of it.
Yeah.
They needed something that was live and in real time, to just avoid that whole concept of driving the car facing backwards.
And I'm just curious in terms of internally, did the organization recognize that they had that challenge, or were they just, because I get the feeling that when you talk to ops leaders, there's two groups. One where there's generally a lack of investment in across ops generally, but there are some organizations that recognize that and others that just carry on the way they're going. Was there an internal recognition that this needed to change and be solved?
Yeah, there definitely was. And I think one of the things that Fidelity likes to build its own tools and its own systems. So there was, a whole culture around, well, we build stuff ourselves. So to try and solve for that was almost, it was a huge task, and it was quite daunting for a lot of the leaders. So, when I came and tried to take in that problem statement and do something about it, there was quite a lot to be able to take on, and every single one of them signed up to it because they said, if you can solve for that problem, then count me in.
Yeah, totally. And I think, as you say, once you can demonstrate what good looks like and what the power of better data management looks like, then hopefully you get people coming on the journey with you. So how did you start? You obviously created a problem statement. You started to go in front of different stakeholders. Just kind of talk us through how you got, I guess, the organization aligned to want to do something like this.
So we understood the problem statement, and as with all change, it's best to start with someone with an open door, someone who's willing to jump and be first. So that's what we did. We had some teams that were based in the UK and India. The senior leaders were really bought into the idea and the concept, and they were the ones that actually had some of the self-built tools already. So we had a really good baseline to be able to compare our information with them. But then also we purposefully chose a couple of teams that didn't have any kind of solution in there, who were just tracking things on emails or spreadsheets, because we wanted to see if we could prove both cases out. And we did. We rolled out for a kind of proof of concept. I think it was around 150 people to begin with, just to really see if it would work. And within 12 weeks, we had really usable data. We had data that we could trust, that was validated all the way across the way. We had a whole planning suite that we were able to use to make better decisions, forecasts that we could trust. So it was a really successful proof of concepts, and from that we got all the funding approved, and we were able to progress with the rest of the rest of the journey.
It's a really interesting, a few comments you made there. I was at a conference just actually yesterday, a business transformation and a banking transformation summit, and a lot of the commentary yesterday was all about unsurprising AI and data, but also trust. This whole idea of, can you trust the data that you're generating? So it seems like that within a short period of time you were able to prove within the organization that you can trust that information. Did you ever find that a hurdle, or was it because they were so far behind in the data they had that once it got into the systems and it was more automated, it became more trustworthy? What was that journey like?
Yeah, so trust with all data, especially in the kind of planning teams that we've set up. In any planning team, I'd say, if your data isn't accurate, that instantly you'll lose the trust of the people that's going to that's trying to use that data. So for me, that was like number one. We had to be able to trust it. And one of the really important things is that the people who are validating the data, making sure that it's accurate and a true reflection of the work that they're doing, they take ownership of that. Because ultimately, it's not going to be for me or any of the senior leaders to go into a team level and try and quiz or question that data on a day-to-day basis. So any discrepancies just have to be ironed out at the ground level. They need to own it, and they did. They were fantastic, and the guys really took responsibility for it. They understood the big picture of why we needed this information, how it can help them on a day-to-day basis, but also how it can help the senior leaders planning and prioritizing for further horizons.
And I guess, Ben, in some ways what you're describing there is, if you can demonstrate to the individuals the importance of creating the accuracy in the data that's going to help them in their roles moving forward, then I think you're right. People take ownership of that, right? Because sometimes it becomes a chore, doesn't it, to make sure the data's correct and you're typing it into your systems and all the rest of it at that front end. Was there a kind of penny drop moment, or was there something that you did that you can look back at and say, well, that's the thing that tipped it over the edge?
I think it's making it useful. If we're creating data for data's sake, that's when it's not it's not useful. They won't want to do it. They won't buy into the idea, and things will just peter out. Whereas actually, if they're using it on a day-to-day basis, they can see the value that it brings, and it's turning the dials. That's probably the biggest thing. Let's be honest. They're making decisions, and they can see how those decisions play out, good or bad, and they can adjust. That's the bit where it becomes valuable for them, and you've got them from there.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. It's probably one of the biggest challenges with going down a data-driven culture is convincing everybody the importance of it. And I think you're right. Once you have some quick wins and people understand that it actually moves the needle, whatever that needle is for that organization, then all of a sudden it becomes part of the culture, doesn't it? It becomes part of the DNA to become very, very data-centric. So going back to the kind of journey you guys went on, so you've done the POC and you've kind of proven it out and you've got the funding, but technically you've got, I would imagine, you can describe it better than I will. I would imagine you had silos of data. You had data in different formats, different ways of collecting it, different ways of understanding measurements. How do you go about consolidating all that stuff? And what that kind of journey look like?
So we've got data in all kind of conditions. We've got teams that are taking their workflow in from emails, which then transform onto our workflow tools. We've got workflow tools that are directly controlling the processes. We've got multiple workflow tools. So you're right, all of that kind of stuff has to come together again to talk a common language. And that was one of the biggest challenges that we wanted to face. And I guess on top of all of that, we didn't want to, impact the guys too much. So they've got enough on their plate. They've got, work to be getting on with. The last thing we want to be doing is adding additional touch points. So for me, right from the outset, talked about at the conference last year, integration was like number one for us. We had to take all the bits of information that we had across all of our workflow tools and get it into one single source. So we were fortunate enough to have a data lake, which most of this kind of information comes into. So that's anything from our, process data to our workforce, their holidays, their leave, their sickness, things like that, all into one place. We had another tool that was able to transform that and be able to pass it back. So all the different systems are all talking together. And where possible, we had, if you click for a piece of work, that it's been done. We know that it's been done. We don't need somebody to tell any kind of systems that it's been done additionally. So removing touch points from people where possible, trying to optimize the whole process. And to be fair, that it was a challenge. There was lots of hurdles along the way, and I think one of the things that we learned from the outset was, and it kind of came naturally. So we couldn't get hold of some of the transformation tool developers for a period of time. So we had to go live manually. So we went live manually, and then after those guys freed up, we were able to then talk about the integration and the automation of that thing. But what we kind of discovered really quickly on was that was a benefit. Being able to have something that was recorded as individuals have recorded it, and then have something to be able to compare against how our integration and our automated solution was then working was really valuable. Goes back to some of the stuff that we would teach guys in the military. If you're doing map reading, yes, you've got GPS, but learn how to do a compass, because if the battery's on the GPS, you need to know where you're going. So what we've actually employed is that all the way along the way is, if we're going to use the integration, we go live manually first, turn on the integration later. The guys feel the difference as well. So again, that's another kind of plus for them. But we have two different data sources that we can compare.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of things that that kind of strike me in terms of as you're describing it. In a normal operational environment, you've obviously got the ops function, and then you've got the tech IT function within most organizations. And, I know you're kind of more in the CIO group. So, a lot of ops leaders kind of struggle to get airtime with their IT folks to kind of invest and do things differently within operations. So they kind of struggle with what they've already got. In this case of Fidelity, was this thing driven out of the CIO organization, or was it driven out of ops? How did that kind of politics work in for yourselves?
So for us, this was an operational problem. And at the time, it was driven from operations, which wasn't the traditional route. Usually these kind of projects come from a technology team. They're kind of sponsored in from a wider improvement team. So for us, it was around gaining the sponsorship at the top level so they could have the conversations. And personally, we had to have lots of different conversations around, because it was completely new to me. Onboarding a tool I had never had to do before. So I had to learn all the different processes that people would have normally gone through. So it was a huge learning journey for me. But the guys at Fidelity and all the different teams, they were great. They helped me through it. I had lots of people that I could lean on around the organization to help me guide me through that process. So, it wasn't completely painless, but the due diligence and the right things that we had to do to get it over the line, we did that.
Yeah, and I think it's it's never as easy as it sounds, right? These things are always quite a journey, particularly when you're talking about data and merging data together and giving it a single view. We talk about a single view of operational data. So now, effectively, you've created that single view of operational data that allows you to then base decisions off the back of that, right? So if we kind of fast forward to what's happened since, so you've got that single view. So, what's been the impact internally? What are the things, if you take of it from a point of view of your colleagues in operations, how has that impacted them?
So the things that we've kind of seen across the board, we've got, the day-to-day running of of the operational teams is now kind of forward looking. It was
Right.
always retrospectively, we were always looking back and we
Yeah.
were saying, what did we do? That whole conversation is now completely shifted into, these are the things that we can see coming over the horizon. How do we best plan for that? So it's a really nice dynamic and shift in that conversation, because you've seen the teams trying to preempt, the things that are going to come and give us a challenge. But having all the information in one solution is fantastic. You can scroll up all the way through the organization, aggregate it to an individual level, all the way up to the top of the organization, having that single view, that single language. And what we found is the teams, they've been absolutely fantastic. I think about a third of our operational teams now are able to flex resources between each other to optimize. So we've been really sensible about how we do that. It's also been a great learning opportunity for a lot of people, because they're not just in one team, they're able to kind of look out and support. So it's created kind of alternate career paths for people. So yeah, it's been fantastic. And for the senior leaders, again, we've started to integrate that into as many decision-making processes as we can. The headcount planning, the budget process, project sign-off. So again, that's a whole nother angle that we struggled with a lot, was that an initiative was put in place. It had a business case. We would deliver that solution, and then we would find it really difficult to prove the benefits case of that project. And there was always this kind of operations don't feel the impact, technology say it's been delivered. And there was that kind of conversation going on all the time, but that's now completely gone. We're able to say, we did this process improvement. We think it was going to save X amount of FTE. It has, and we can tell them the exact date, or we can say it didn't do 5 FTE, but it did 3. That's how we're feeling it. So we can have that conversation. They're doing that at all levels now as well.
That's amazing. And I guess one of the things that seems really basic, Ben, but having a common language or common lexicon across ops must make a massive difference, right? It sounds obvious, but as you said before, there was different views and different ways of measuring stuff. And it's just a simple thing like that just transforms how everybody engages. Is that a fair statement? I mean, do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. We had productivity, utilization, effectiveness. We had all these different kind of conversations going on, and different interpretations of the same measures. So yeah, being able to just talk one language, simplify things, and make the decisions required at both of those KPIs.
So do you think that or are you still? I assume this is still an ongoing journey anyway, Ben, but there's almost a feeling that what you're saying is you went from kind of a view of people making decisions from gut feel and experience and just what they knew at the time, into now being making decisions based upon the reality and fact of data and what's actually happening in the business. And that's a massive transition from where you were to where you are now. So has that had an impact? It's obviously had an impact internally from an operations point of view, and the savings and all the things that you've talked about. Have you seen a knock-on impact on the engagement with the customer?
So what we've seen is, because we've created, now we've been able to demonstrate and create more operational control. The kind of the ebb and the flow of seasonality has just become a little bit more plateaued. So our service levels, service levels for us is always one of the key focuses, because it just creates, if we dip on our service levels, that just creates problem downstream in complaints and things like that. And it's the last thing we want. So,
Of course.
For us, it's around that operational control. But what we've then seen, and what I guess the customers may not have directly felt, is that because we've got that broader spectrum of skill set, we're able to control the backlogs more. We're able to control our overtime and things like that. So for customers, it's probably not a direct impact that they would necessarily be able to pinpoint, but we can see at a broader level that it's improved things drastically.
Yeah, that's a big kind of step forward, I guess. So when you kind of look back now, I think you've been on this journey for a couple of years, maybe, and if I remember rightly, when you look back at this journey, the things that you've implemented, what would you say if you're going to give advice to somebody that's going down this path? that needs to become more data-centric from an ops point of view, what are the sort of things that you would recommend? What things would you point to are the things that you must do in order to get to where you are today?
Probably, I would focus on that integration point, because you kind of don't realize the benefits. Some of the teams won't necessarily know how lucky they are to have that.
Yeah.
I know I was speaking to different customers at the conference last year where they haven't integrated, something simple like, having to update your holiday. We have tools, most organizations have tools that track that kind of stuff, and just having to do that twice is just, let's be honest, a waste of everyone's time. So knowing that stuff, knowing it in advance as well is super helpful. So I'd definitely say focus on the integration, because it just saves so much time, and it just creates a much more scalable environment for when things change over time. And then probably just make sure that you've got the senior sponsorship as any kind of change. The senior sponsorship is really helpful, because you will face challenges within teams. I think every single team that we've gone into has told us how unique they are and how challenging this will be. You guys probably find this all the time, how unique they are and how impossible this task is going to be. But just giving them that space to almost vent, and then being able to take them on the journey to be able to say, you are special, you are unique, but rolled up, ultimately it's all numbers and all averages. And would having more accurate, effective planning be beneficial to you? The answer is going to be yes across the board. So just taking people on that journey, and then, like we've done, don't just focus on operational teams, kind of look wider, be really experimental with it. We put it into our budget process, we put it into our headcount tracking process at the top of the organizational level. We've doubled down on some of the kind of metrics that we can get. We've kind of started to make our own. So we've got a real focus on well-being at Fidelity. We want to make sure that we're focused on our people's well-being, that we're pushing them enough that it's challenging environment, but also we want to know that we're not pushing people too far, because we care about our staff. So we came up with a measure that's a well-being score, and that's taking things like the overtime, flexi time. Is the overuse of any of that overtime creating any kind of sickness? And are people taking their own holiday to kind of counteract that? So are people being responsible with when they take time off? And what that's been able to do is, across the organization, we've got that as a rolled up score, and we're able to kind of then look to see if there's any early warning signs that, for example, now we've got quite high usage of holiday. So people are front loading a lot of their holiday. That's going to create us a problem later on. So we're able to have that conversation at all levels, and kind of get ahead of things. So yeah, the last one is probably focus on the other opportunities that you can put this information out wider.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. And I'm curious about the wellness score. So how is that kind of has it since you've been measuring it, have you seen any kind of trends in it? And are those markers true if you put people through? I mean, it's obvious if you put through people too much overtime, they'll burn themselves out. But are you starting to see those trends?
Yeah. So I mean, from an operational planning perspective, overtime is fantastic, because you're being able to get experienced staff, and there isn't any kind of shrinkage involved. So you're able to get that kind of optimum level of time. Overtime is paid, whereas we've got the measure of flexi time, which is time that isn't paid for. So it's almost the goodwill of the teams. And we're really conscious that we're not putting too much goodwill. People aren't waking up at 6 a.m. and logging in and then finishing at 6 at night, because it's just not sustainable. It's not good for their well-being. So we put those metrics across the organization so that we understand when they might be used, but we're aware of the impacts of that. And that's why we're looking at if there's any correlation between the usage of flexi time and overtime. Does it have any impact on sickness? And are people being responsible with the holiday taken? And like I say, we're able to have those conversations now where we can start to say, look, we are front loading holiday. Are we creating a problem that's going to jump up and bite us later on in the year? And then also for the overtime and flexi time, it's really keeping a keen eye on that, because it's the indicator to, does that team actually need more resource?
Of course. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting how once you get your data in an environment where you can leverage it, it opens up conversations around things that you assume, but now you've got data to back it up or data to support that. So when you think about the journey you've been on yourself personally, Ben, I mean, what's your kind of proudest moment in the lifetime of this project? What do you kind of look back at?
I think it's I think it's probably taking something that is in your head and turn it into reality.
Yeah.
I think that's what's always tricky about these things is the senior leaders within the organization are essentially buying you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, me working with, you know, other people around the organization, Laura, Jonathan, we were all able to come together, pitch an idea to a problem, and you know, essentially we have to sell it to the business so that they buy into it, and ultimately they're buying you, but also, you know, you're putting your head on the on the block here, because you know, you've taken something that, you know, might work, might not work. So, you know, it was really being able to say, I think I've got an idea, coming up with a solution, and actually seeing it through to the end. I think that's, you know, like any project, we were in a nice delivery window where, you know, you're actually still going to be here to see the results. So yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, you know, I guess the converse question then is, if you look back at it, what would you kind of do differently? What are the things that you kind of you gotchas think, oh man, I shouldn't have done it that way. Perhaps I should have done it slightly different ways. Anything that any tips like that for, you know, anybody else going through this kind of similar process?
Well, yeah, probably. So I always quite like to push the boundaries, and we were quite experimental in some of the teams that we put the solution in, and I'd probably say save that a little bit for later, because we had enough on our plate to be able to keep us busy on just core operational teams.
Yeah.
But I really did want to try and solve as many problems as I could, and we put it into some of the teams where it may not naturally fit. Now we've come through the other end of that, and it's adding extreme value for all of those guys. But I guess just during a really busy window, that's probably one of the things I would say. Just be mindful of the people that you're delivering this to, and come to that later on maybe.
Yeah, because there's a lot of change involved, right? It's not just a
Yeah.
simple matter of getting a data environment. There's a lot of change in the way you do things in order to move forward. So that's a really good practical piece of advice. So you've talked a little bit about some of the stuff that you're doing now with the wellness score and those kind of things, but what's next for you in this data journey? Because now you've got the environment in place, you're well suited and you're well placed to kind of drive further improvements within your organization. What's next for you in that journey?
So I guess key focus for me right now is to sustain what we've got already at the moment. You know, it's across a lot of people, and for me, I don't want any of that to fall over and go back. So it's making sure that we've got all the things in place that we can sustain, you know, the good work that we've already delivered.
Yeah.
And maintain that data integrity as we spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I just said about don't be too experimental. So I'm going to contradict myself now. We've got an opportunity in some of our technology teams. So as GPS has come together, you know, you talked about the technology teams and operational teams traditionally being separate. In our new operating model that we put in, we're actually trying to combine both. We're having those teams put together to create capabilities that are focused on customer outcomes. Within that, they'll have their own change in technology teams that will be able to deliver the value straight to the capability that they're involved with, and hopefully that will speed up change. And one of the things that you know, that agile within those teams as they deliver is the organization's kind of got this picture now where we've got absolutely fantastic data on the run the business side, and they've got these metrics that aren't supporting longer term planning. So hot off the press, we're trying to do a proof of concept in a couple of the squads within the agile teams to see if we can support the quantification of a story point.
Oh wow.
So my thinking is that an individual's interpretation of of their time, or their relative estimation, is very similar to an operational task at the beginning of your journey. If you think that if we could guess and put a standard time in, say that task will take 10 minutes, if we can apply the same logic over a longer time for a story point, I'm hoping that what that will show is the individuals what their estimation of that story point might equal over time.
Yeah.
And then for the product owner, they'll be able to then see what the team's relative estimation of a story point is and how many story points they think they're going to get through. And then we just get back to the same conversation as we have normally, where you plan to get through this many story points in a sprint. How many did you get through? If there was any blockers or barriers, what were the challenges? What did you learn from that? What were the things that were distracting you from delivering the outcome, and what can we do differently next time? So that's the latest thing that we're going to trial. Like I say, it's going to be a proof of concept. I might be proven completely wrong and it's not going to work, but the guys in the agile teams are, they're experimental in themselves. They're up for the challenge, and we'll see where we get to.
Well, it sounds like a really interesting POC or pilot that you're going to run through. Now, look, it would be wrong of me not to bring up the AI question when we're talking about data. It is, the hottest topic out there at the moment in all businesses and all parts of businesses, but particularly in operations, right? The whole idea of AI coming into ops, things that ops leaders have never been able to do. In theory, they should be able to do more automation, less people, all that kind of stuff is really, central to all conversations. I mean, I normally talk to two groups of people, either ones that are super excited about what AI is going to bring, and the other half of them which are just fed up of, when is AI actually going to deliver something of real value for an operations perspective? What I mean, and my view on it is always you can't do any of it without data. You can't really drive the things you want to do without a data environment. Now, you guys have already built that data environment, and you're well placed. So, are you thinking about AI? Are you thinking about how you leverage the technology within the work that you've already done? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so we have heavily invested in a team to look at solutions within our organization around delivering AI. Some of the work that the operational teams complete requires them to consume an awful lot of information in summaries and legal documentation. So I think that's where kind of the focus is going to be, is how they summarize some of that information and present it back to a human being to help make the decision quicker. That will evolve over time. I think for me, it probably goes back to some of the journey that I was on with Lead in general when they were pushing out automation. And as a change lead, the hardest thing when you put automation into an individual team is that the human beings in that process will always doubt the solution. They'll always try and challenge it.
Yes, of course.
And it goes back to that kind of trust within the data. So it's the responsibility of people who are delivering those solutions and the guys in the operational teams to make sure that it is trustworthy, it's showing the right information, and then get behind it. And I think it's exciting because the guys on the ground, if they don't have to trawl through hours of information or legal documentation, that's only a good thing as long as it gets to the same outcome. There's a load of other stuff for them to be focusing their time on rather than reading through. So if it helps us in that angle, then brilliant. I think for the data, the analytics side of it, I think is going to be really key. So if you've got the amount of data that we now have, and all the other kind of information that we have across the board, how can the predictive AI start to support better decision making for operational planning? That would be really exciting for me. I always like when there's a human interaction point as well, because I like that you get presented with the information that the AI might interpret. I do like it when there's a human intervention point, when you can start to say, okay, but you don't know that X is going to happen, so that you can kind of manipulate it and add that human element. So yeah, there's some stuff going on across the board. I think it's exciting, and I think people that don't just get behind it and invest in it are gonna fall by the wayside. So I think it's basically on all of us to embrace it.
Yeah.
But be cautious, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's where we are, isn't it, in terms of the evolution. I think certainly my personal view is that ops in the future has to be data centric, and that is the only way you can go in order to drive the improvements that ops needs to make across the different businesses they operate within. So being data centric allows you to capitalize on AI and other technologies that will come in the future. So hence why your story is such a fascinating journey that you've been on, because in some ways you're probably ahead of the curve in some organizations that we talk to, and I've had the privilege to speak to, and there's different pockets of it. But this whole idea of getting that central data environment, becoming a data-led culture, becomes it sets you up very well for what the future is likely to be. So, I appreciate you taking the time to share your story. It's been a really interesting exploration in terms of the journey that you went on and the outcomes you've achieved. And I think any of our listeners to the podcast, there's a lot of really great insights there in terms of how they can take that and take it into their own organizations and start transforming their organizations to become much more data centric. So Ben, thank you so much for taking your time.
Thank you for having me.
And being an ops game changer on the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for our listeners for joining us, and please do check in to catch up more episodes of Ops Game Changers to hear more fascinating insights from Ops Game Changers and leaders in the field of operations as they go to transform and overcome challenges. So thanks for listening, and bye for now.
Today's Ops Game Changers podcast was brought to you by Active Ops. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can do that by sharing them on our Facebook, LinkedIn, or X feeds, or you can comment in the comments section of the YouTube version of this podcast. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard, please do like and subscribe, and check back soon to hear more valuable insights from other inspiring leaders in operations. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye.